and welcome to all listeners to this podcast on self-directed learning. Today we will discuss many aspects on what is SDL and ways to incorporate it in the classroom. SDL is mainly an independent type of learning that allows students to take charge of their own learning. And it was surprisingly conceptualized for adults in the beginning, but then the philosopher Dewey, with his constructivism theory, inspired SDL in lower schooling levels because he believed that education should be based on the principle of learning through doing, which is actually true because today we are seeing a lot of children taking part in self-directed learning, right?
Yeah, so we actually are seeing it more and more in classrooms with younger children. But there's been some research done looking into how exactly it works with a younger crowd because you kind of have to have a different environment than you would with adults. So there's an article by research. It's an older article, like from the 80s, but I find the information is still relevant, by Edward Deci and Richard Ryan. So they're basically talking about the learning environment has to promote a relationship between behavior and outcome. So the kids really have to understand that there is a possibility for them to behave in ways that lead predictably to desired outcomes. So they have to know that they can do something and it will always give an outcome that they're looking for. Because otherwise, like if they do something and sometimes they get a reward or sometimes they get recognition, it kind of more often than not leads to like a motivated kids. So like kids who are just not motivated to work. But they also mention that environment isn't enough, because to have an environment that fosters motivation, there has to be some sort of motivation existing already in the students. So they kind of talk about looking into intrinsic motivation and how to foster that further. So they talk about things like choice in a certain subject. So they get to choose what they're learning and for how long they have to work on a certain project. They talk about also positive competence feedback. So that's kind of like, instead of saying you did this, this, and this wrong, it's let's look at all the things you did right and what are the steps moving forward to get you to the end goal. And then they also talk about things that like really work against intrinsic motivation. So things like rewards don't work because then students start to link their behavior to a reward and it becomes more like extrinsic motivation than anything else. And that's not long lasting. And it also doesn't yield as good results because they're more focused on getting the reward than the actual quality of their work. And then the last thing that they look into is also a positive interdependence, which I know Luna will bring up when she kind of explains Jigsaw, but just quickly to touch on it, they talk about how being able to work together towards a common goal and seeing the result is a really good way to boost intrinsic motivation because they know that their peers are depending on them and it motivates them to do better.
Yeah, and also if I can add, integrating like motivation in like the classroom might also make students discover like new passions with like making them choose the subject they wanted to discuss, and it might also make them like want to learn more, discover like new subject, and they might also feel like they belong. So I guess like motivation is really an important subject in SDL.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so motivation and that creative freedom that was just discussed. An example of SDL where those motivations and collaboration are very present is in Jigsaw. And Jigsaw is a classroom technique, and it's when students are put into groups and they're given a topic, and each student will independently research a specific subtopic relating to the main topic, and then will teach their peers about the subtopic that they've kind of become an expert on. And then they will learn about their peer subtopics. And it will look different in an elementary grade level versus a high school grade level. For younger students, I think like grade 6, there's an example, and they were given the term adolescence as the main topic, and the teacher provided the students with the subtopics. So they were told to research adolescence regarding health and or issues in relationships. And that provided them with a little more guidance. But in high school settings with older students, they're allowed to research more generally. So if a student is interested in history or math or English, they can go to those general topics and then research as they would like. But in both scenarios, the students are given the freedom to research their subtopics independently and to seek out whatever resources the students want. And that's what makes it student directed. And when students have so much control over their research and so much independence on the websites and resources they seek out to become experts on their subtopics, they might feel more excited or enthusiastic about learning a topic as opposed to being handed a document that they have no say in and just being forced to read it. And there's a lot of benefits to this jigsaw learning style or technique. There's reduced anxiety because they're collaborating in smaller groups as opposed to speaking in a big classroom. And just like their peers, they're only expert on their subtopic and they're teaching their peers all about their subtopic. So there's no kind of like hierarchy of knowledge. Like everybody's kind of on the same playing level. All students in the group are like eager to learn.
Yeah, I like that point a lot because it's like, especially in high school settings, you'll get people who almost compete to show off how much they know about a certain thing. But if you have students who become experts in their group, you kind of reduce that a little bit, right? Because it's like, you know about this, I know about this, now let's collaborate and put this work together.
Yeah, because they have that main goal of being educated on a big topic on adolescence, for example. The whole group wants to be educated on adolescence and what that means. And it takes participation and collaboration from each group member. So everybody wants everybody to succeed, because if one person doesn't succeed, then the other group members will perform less well because of that.
And I think that what you just said, Luna, might like help like, you know, even younger students to improve like their social skills in a way that they know that it's not just them, but they have to think about like everyone else that's in the group. So it's a group work and social skills improvement, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of you're responsible for your own learning and also the learning of your peers, and that will motivate people to put in a lot of effort.
Mm-hmm.
Besides all the benefits about the SDL and Jigsaw, we need to think about the challenges associated with that. And I think one of the challenges is that the information overload. We can anticipate that our future students are going to use to surf on the internet to search for the information about the topic. And from the large amount of information, students are expected to select those that are relevant to their research. And as a prior skill, students need information literacy before SDL. Without that skill, then some studies have shown that information overload affects students' participations and processing level in debates and presenting the information that they've brought. And challenges that I can think about Jigsaw is that it is totally dependent on a teacher who is going to lead the activity. And if the activity is not properly managed or approached by the teacher, then the purpose of the activity may not be established. So I think the teacher needs to clarify the role of the students, and we need to tell them that they're going to take a role as a teacher to be the experts of the topic, and we can tell them that the information that they can bring is unlimited. And yeah,
I think that the things you pointed out are kind of why people have historically like leaned on guided learning, because it is just easier as the teacher, as the authority figure in the room, to be like, okay, I don't want them to fail, so I'm going to do as much as I can to guide them in the right direction. But like, it kind of makes you think, is there room in a classroom for both self-directed learning and guided learning from the teacher? It's like, how do you find a balance between the two?
Yeah, because we've talked a lot about only SDL in this podcast, but like maybe there's place, like you said, for both SDL and guided learning, because surely guided learning is as much as advantageous as SDL, but I think that maybe teacher that only use SDL might not have the right tools to incorporate LZL into their classroom.
And I also think that the extent of intervention by the teachers is going to differ according to the level of the students.
Yeah, I think if you don't have a competent teacher who fully understands or even wants to incorporate the jigsaw technique into the classroom, then they might not explain it properly. And I think there was an example of younger students who knew the jigsaw technique, But when they tried to put it into action, they skipped the important step of teaching their peers about their subtopic. And so it didn't go as well as it should have because they just didn't understand it fully.
Yeah, and that's like a risk, right? Because especially with little kids, you can try to explain it in a way that you think makes sense. But like you said, Luna, like if you have a teacher who's not completely motivated to do it or doesn't know how to do it right, it's very easy to miss little details like that. Like for us, it's implied, okay, you're all going to learn about this and then you're going to teach it to each other. But if you don't explicitly say that, it could be missed. And like you said, it did happen. So there's always a risk.
Well, thanks for listening to our podcast on self-directed learning. I hope that you have learned a lot, and now if you're a teacher and listening to this podcast, that you have a little bit of more of an idea what is self-directed learning, and that you can incorporate it more in your classroom. And yeah, so thanks for listening.